The Cold War wasn't fought with pitched battles and open fields. It was fought in shadows, in whispers, secret tunnels, on frozen seas, in places where truth and myth blurred. Behind the Iron Curtain, ordinary people and extraordinary operations and unexplained stories collided in ways that still echo throughout history. Tonight, I'm going to take you into 4 of the most compelling and mysterious chapters of that silent conflict, where daring, desperation, and the darkness of secrecy shaped events few outside the intelligence communities ever knew. These are the shadows of the Cold War.
I walk through silence, thick and cold, where shadows drift and time grows old. No voice to call, no path to take, just fog and fear with every ache. Souls in the fog.
So we begin in Berlin in 1961. The wall had just split the city in two. Cement, barbed wire, and patrols replaced bridges, boulevards, and shared neighborhoods. In East Berlin, suspicion was everywhere, and freedom was measured in whispers. Among the tens of thousands living on the eastern side was a young teacher named Ingrid. Not a spy, not a defector in the usual sense, just a woman whose daily life had become a confrontation with an oppressive system. Now, Ingrid had grown up in a small German town, dreaming of literature and learning. She became a teacher, one who believed in human possibility, conversation, and cultural exchange. And when offered a chance to teach in East Berlin as part of a cultural exchange program in late 1960, she thought it would be an adventure, a chance to teach children whose parents still hoped for unity. But Berlin was no ordinary posting. Checkpoints, surveillance cameras, and plainclothes agents trailing even ordinary conversations made every interaction a risk. Ingrid noticed how classmates who questioned authority disappeared from classrooms. She saw how neighbors avoided eye contact. She felt the weight of the unseen eyes every morning when she was stepping outside of her apartment. And over the coming months, her initial excitement turned into dread. She tried small acts of resistance, talking privately with students about Western literature, finding ways to smuggle books, but each act carried consequences. Letters went missing, calls were monitored, fear replaced purpose. Then one morning in March 1962, Ingrid made her choice. She walked into the West German consulate in East Berlin, a small nondescript building, and requested asylum. The officials inside, trained for crisis, saw the terror in her eyes, but also knew the cost of helping her escape. And at the consulate's second-floor window, with guards on the street below and East German police converging, Ingrid understood that time was slipping. And in that terrifying moment, without hesitation, she stepped forward and she jumped. Now, for a brief second, the world stopped. Berliners in the street watched in stunned silence as she fell, arms outstretched, gray concrete rushing right up to meet her. Sirens wailed, soldiers scrambled, and the entire city seemed to hold its breath. Now, Ingrid survived the fall with severe injuries, some broken bones, and internal trauma. But she lived. Her escape became an international news story. Western media turned it into a symbol of defiance and courage. Eastern officials denounced her as a criminal and a traitor. Politicians debated her flight. Teachers cited her bravery. Students wrote essays, and Berlin watched, divided as ever, but reminded that even in the darkest zones of fear, individuals sometimes choose action over silence. Now, the truth of this story is stranger in its own way. This story didn't happen in Berlin. It happened in New York City in 1948. The fully verified details that we have was her name was Oksana Stepanova Kasinka. And she was a Soviet school teacher and tutor for diplomatic children. The date that the incident occurred was August 12, 1948. And this happened at the Soviet Consulate General, which is in Manhattan, New York. Kasankina had been instructing children of Soviet diplomats at the United Nations. By summer 1948, she reportedly didn't want to return to the Soviet Union, a dangerous position to take. Soviet citizens abroad were very strictly monitored. On August 7th, she disappeared, and the Tolstoy Foundation alerted American authorities. Soviet officials located her and took her to the consulate, diplomatic territory where U.S. authorities, they can't intervene. They can do nothing. So 5 days later, she plunged from a third-floor window. Witnesses watched her fall into the courtyard below. She survived severe broken bones, internal trauma, and she was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital. The incident did ignite a diplomatic crisis. The U.S. accused the Soviets of holding her captive. The Soviets countered that anti-communist groups were responsible. The crisis led to the closure of the Soviet consulate in New York and retaliatory closures of the U.S. consulates in Leningrad and Vladivostok. Kesenkina ultimately remained in the United States, and over the decades, retellings blurred the location and circumstance, which gave rise to the myth of the Berlin teacher defying East Germany, a story that captures imagination, but not reality. Our next tale highlights both ingenuity and betrayal. It's one thing to watch someone defy limitations above ground, but it's another to dig beneath them. So, in the 1950s, Berlin wasn't just a symbol of the East-West tension. It was the literal nerve center of Soviet military communications in Europe. Every major telephone, telegraph, and coded signal passed through junctions inside East Berlin on its way to Warsaw Pact headquarters. Western intelligence had the tools to intercept messages, but not the access. Enter two of the most secretive intelligence services of the era. The U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, known as the CIA, and Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. Now, the CIA and MI6 proposed an audacious plan. They wanted to build a tunnel from West Berlin into the heart of East Berlin's Soviet communication grid. A tunnel large enough for men, equipment, and wiring, disguised and undetected. They called it Operation Gold. Construction began in January 1954 beneath a warehouse in West Berlin's Neukölln district. The team dug discreetly for more than a year. Engineers developed custom steel support systems, hydraulic shields, and ventilation to prevent collapse. The tunnel stretched roughly 1,450 feet from western sector under the border into Soviet command hub. It was wide enough for workers to stand and move equipment, narrow enough to keep excavation fairly minimal. Underground, it was like another world. Cold soil, the echo shovels, faint sounds of the city streets far above. Lights humming against the earth's pressure, technicians installing these listening devices that could tap wires without interrupting signal flow. A feat of mechanical and electrical precision. By May 1955, Operation Gold was operational. The tunnel allowed the West to tap into hundreds of telephone circuits and tens of thousands of hours of encrypted traffic. Now, analysts later reported intercepting over 443,000 individual conversations, over 40,000 hours of phone traffic, and something like 50,000 reels of recordings. This massive cache yielded insights into the Warsaw Pact troop movements, Soviet logistical problems, internal dissent, and longer-range strategic plans, and it came directly unfiltered from Soviet military lines. Now, unfortunately, the tunnel was never really a secret. A mole within MI6, British intelligence officer George Blake, had betrayed the plan to the KGB before construction ever even began. So while American and British engineers poured months of sweat into the tunnel, the Soviets watched, learned, and chose to do nothing. Why? Well, because exposing Blake would have revealed the true breach, a trusted MI6 officer feeding secrets to Moscow. Instead, Soviet counterintelligence allowed the tunnel to operate for over a year, then discovered it in April 1956. Now, the Soviets had made the discovery publicly, and they broke into the tunnels with cameras, crowds, and propaganda. They accused the West of espionage and declared the operation a scandal. Western newspapers, far from shying away from this one, ran stories marveling at the technical audacity. Doing the most American thing they can, spin the hell out of the story to sound better than it really is. Today, parts of the Berlin Tunnel are on display in Berlin museums. Historians argue about how much intelligence was actually gleaned versus how much the Soviets already knew, how much fake information they passed along through those lines. Nevertheless, Operation Gold stands as one of the most ambitious intelligence projects of the 20th century. A story of engineering, betrayal, and the depths nations will go to hear their enemy's voice. They really like each other. In early 1968, at the height of the Cold War, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine slips quietly into the Pacific Ocean. Her name was Soviet submarine K-129. She belonged to the Soviet Navy's Golf II class, diesel-electric submarines designed to carry nuclear ballistic missiles. These submarines were part of the Soviet Union's early nuclear deterrent, capable of launching nuclear warheads against the distant targets. K-129 operated out of a naval base on the remote Kamchatka Peninsula in the Soviet Far East. The submarine measured roughly 325 feet and displaced about 2,800 tons, and carried a crew of approximately 98 officers and sailors. Her primary weapon systems consisted of 3 R-21 ballistic missiles, each capable of delivering a nuclear warhead. Now, in addition to these missiles, the submarine also carried torpedoes, some of them nuclear-armed. In early March 1968, K-129 departed on what appeared to be a routine deterrence patrol in the North Pacific. But several things about this patrol were unusual. According to later research, a significant number of the submarine's crew had recently been reassigned to the vessel. Some estimates suggest up to 40 of the crew members were new to the submarine. That meant a lot of the sailors may have been far less familiar with the specific systems aboard the K-129. Even more unusual was that the submarine may have left port earlier than expected, suggesting the patrol schedule may have been accelerated. At the time, however, none of this raised any alarms. The submarines departed quietly all the time during the Cold War, and K-129 disappeared just as quietly. On the night of March 8, 1968, something catastrophic happened somewhere in the vast Pacific. Thousands of miles away, deep underwater, listening stations operated by the United States Navy recorded a strange sound. These sensors were part of a secret acoustic surveillance known as SOSUS. SOSUS consisted of the underwater hydrophones placed across the ocean floor designed to detect Soviet submarines moving through the deep waters. On that night, analysts reviewed recordings, heard what one officer later described simply as a good-sized bang. And it was followed by a series of strange acoustic signatures, sounds consistent with metal structures collapsing under enormous pressure. The analysts believed that they were hearing the implosion of the submarine hull. Using multiple listening stations, they triangulated the source of the sound to a remote section of the ocean roughly 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii, and the water was more than 16,000 feet deep. So, at the time, the United States did not know which submarine it was that was lost. And meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, commanders began to realize that K-129 had failed to check in. The radio calls went unanswered, no signals came from the submarine. And as hours turned into days, the Soviet Navy launched a massive search. Ships and aircraft from the Soviet Pacific swept across huge sections of the North Pacific, but the Soviet Navy faced a critical disadvantage. They did not have any detection system like SOSUS, so they had no precision location for the disaster. Their search area stretched across thousands of square miles of open ocean. After weeks of searching, the Soviets found nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no trace of the submarine. Eventually, the search was abandoned. For the families of the 98 crew members aboard the K-129, the submarine had simply vanished. But, across the ocean, American intelligence officers had already begun planning something extraordinary. Once analysts believed the Soviet submarine had been lost, the United States Navy launched a covert secret mission. The submarine assigned to the task was the USS Halibut, and originally built as a missile submarine, Halibut had been converted into a special intelligence platform. It carried sophisticated equipment designed for deep-sea surveillance, including long-towed camera arrays, powerful underwater lighting systems, remote photographic sleds capable of scanning across the whole ocean floor, and Over several months, the Halibut conducted an enormous underwater search. Finally, in the late summer of 1968, the submarine's cameras captured images of something remarkable. Lying on the seabed, more than 3 miles below the surface, was the wreck of the K-129. The submarine was broken and partially buried in the sediment. And they took thousands of photographs of the wreck site. And these images revealed something crucial. The submarine had broken into multiple sections on the ocean floor, but parts of it appeared to be relatively intact. That discovery sparked an extraordinary idea inside the CIA. What if the United States could raise the submarine from the ocean floor? Why the CIA wanted the submarine recovering the wreck of K-129 could potentially give the United States access to some of the Soviet Union's most valuable secrets. Inside the submarine might be nuclear missiles, nuclear torpedoes, Soviet naval encryption machines, declassified codebooks used by the Soviet Navy. There could be a lot of intelligence in there. During the Cold War, obtaining enemy cryptographic systems was considered an intelligence goldmine. So, the CIA began planning what would become one of the most ambitious covert operations ever attempted. This mission would come to be known as Project Azorian. The submarine rested 16,500 feet below the surface. At that depth, water pressure exceeds 7,000 pounds per square inch. That's quite a bit. No salvage operation had ever attempted to recover something that heavy from that deep. To accomplish this mission, engineers designed a completely new type of ship. The vessel would be called the Hughes Glomar Explorer. Now, to the public, the ship was presented as part of an ambitious deep-sea mining project funded by eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. The official story claimed the ship would harvest manganese nodules from the ocean floor. Now, in reality, the ship had a very different purpose. Hidden inside its hull was a massive mechanical claw known as the capture vehicle, and its nickname by the engineers was Clementine. The claw would descend down to the ocean floor, grasp the submarine, and slowly lift it back to the surface. Now, to lower the claw to such depths, engineers used a system similar to offshore oil drilling. Sections of steel pipe were assembled one by one, and forming a giant pipe string stretching miles down into the ocean. The recovery device would travel through a hidden opening in the center of the ship called a moon pool. And this would allow the entire operation to be concealed from outside observers. If successful, it would be the most ambitious deep-sea recovery mission ever attempted. In the summer of 1974, the Glomar Explorer arrived at the wreck site. Over several days, the engineers carefully assembled the pipe string and lowered the vehicle into the abyss. 3 miles down in total darkness, the giant claw closed around part of the submarine's hull. Now, slowly, carefully, the lifting process began. For days, the enormous weight of the submarine was raised just inch by inch toward the surface. Unfortunately, disaster struck during the lift. Partway through the ascent, the submarine hull fractured. Titanic style. A large portion of the wreck broke free and fell back to the ocean floor. Only the forward section of the submarine remained inside of the recovery claw. That section was eventually lifted into the ship's hidden internal hangar. The remains of 6 Soviet sailors were recovered during this. The crew of the Glomar Explorer conducted a solemn burial at sea with full military honors, even playing the Soviet national anthem during the ceremony. And here's the video of this. Now, recovered equipment also reportedly included torpedoes and other military hardware, though many details remain classified. The most valuable section of the submarine, the missile compartment, was lost when the wreck broke apart, and with it also the best chance to determine exactly what caused the disaster of the K-129. Because the critical sections of the submarine were never recovered, the true cause of the sinking still remains unknown. Several theories continue to be debated. Now, one possibility is a missile fuel explosion inside one of the R-21 launch tubes. Another theory is that hydrogen gas explosion from the submarine's batteries, a known hazard aboard diesel-electric subs. Some analysts believe the submarine may have accidentally descended below its crush depth, causing the hull to implode. The most controversial theory suggests a possible collision with the American attack submarine, the USS Swordfish. Now, shortly after the incident, the Swordfish reportedly arrived at Yokosuka Naval Base with visible damage to its sail. Now, the Navy stated the submarine had struck sea ice during Arctic operations, but some researchers believe the damage might have come from an underwater collision. To this day, no definitive proof has ever confirmed that theory, but it does make more sense than the implosion being entirely random. For years, the operation remained secret. When journalists eventually discovered the story, the CIA issued the now famous response, "We can neither confirm nor deny." And that phrase became known as the Glomar response, and it is still used by the intelligence agencies today. Even now, parts of the operation still remain classified. And somewhere beneath nearly 3 miles of Pacific Ocean, the remaining wreckage of the K-129 still lies in the darkness. The submarine that vanished during the Cold War has never fully revealed its secrets. Not every Cold War story is about spies and submarines. Some drift into the realm of the unexplained, rumor, myth, and extraordinary supernatural claims. Among the most bizarre of these is the tale of the Soviet soldiers turned to stone in Siberia. Now, of this event, there is no confirmed official record from Soviet military archives validating the event. However, a declassified CIA memo from the early 1980s summarized a foreign press report claiming a Soviet artillery unit training in remote Siberia encountered an unidentified aircraft. According to the press claim, 23 soldiers suffered instant petrification, their bodies rendered rigid like stone, while 2 survivors sheltered behind trees escaped the phenomenon. This anecdote was first circulated in fringe foreign news outlets and was later summarized in internal intelligence memos. The original article reportedly appeared in a Soviet-aligned publication, but was either misinterpreted by intelligence analysts or it was intentionally vague. The memo circulated without verification, and no official KGB or military archive supports the petrification claim. Now, there are some theories about how this one got started. First is the simple misinterpretation of press reports. It's plausible that a foreign press article describing a tragic training accident was mistranslated or sensationalized, leading to exaggerated secondhand claims. Second possibility is propaganda and rumor. During the Cold War, both sides sometimes released ambiguous reports to confuse adversaries and distract from genuine classified operations. Now, another option is allegory or metaphor. Some analysts interpret the tale as symbolic, a metaphor for soldiers immobilized by fear, extreme climate conditions, or psychological stress. Lastly, the lost testing incident. Others speculate that it might relate to an unknown test, an accident, or an experiment that was deliberately shrouded in secrecy, later misreported in external sources. Regardless of its factual basis, the Stone Soldier's story endures because it encapsulates the era's blend of secrecy, fear, myth, and the unknowable. Now, in the shadows of geopolitics, where information was currency and truth was guarded, even the strange found fertile ground. From a teacher risking everything for freedom to tunnels dug beneath a divided city, the secret missions on the ocean floor to the rumors that defy simple explanation. These are the shadows cast by the Cold War. They remind us that history is not only battles won and treaties signed. It is the human heart beating beneath fear, the ingenuity of minds working in silence, and the stories that rise from the depths of secrecy and time. Join us next time, where we will follow more of the forgotten paths, uncover buried truths, and explore some of the shadows that history won't let us forget. So that's it for this episode. This was another one of the Cold War episodes, and these stories were interesting ones. Unexpected that a lot of them didn't have as much truth to them as one would expect, or that the truth was changed, like the story of the teacher. But all very interesting. All very interesting and very telling on what kind of minds were operating at this time. You know, what were these people thinking? What were they doing? A lot of crazy stuff. So tell me what you thought about all of this down there in them comments. And don't forget to hit that share, like, and subscribe buttons. It helps us out a lot. See you next time.